Meyer and Rena Dubin for dedicating all the Shemar Drashos this month in the zechus of a refuah shlema for their niece, Chava Tzipporah bas Chaya Malka. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, she, together with Kol Cholei Yisroel, have a complete and enduring refuah. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Gobbie Shayna Cohn, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gobbie's grandfather, Meyer Oxman. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. Now, with that, let us begin. A beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Pei Hey 85. So let us pick up in Yirtzeh Hashem. We are actually picking up on Pei Dalet Amud Beis 84b, and we picked up at the two dots, Gufa, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17 lines up from the bottom. So we're picking up actually with a statement from yesterday's daf, a really fascinating idea. So Gufa, Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Lo Husaruk Ksheros Lihinase Lepsulin. Shabbos Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that Ksheros, now in this context, Ksheros means Kohanos, daughters of Kohanim, so women who themselves hail from Kohanic families, who are totally, legitimately, genealogically fit, there is no problem for them to marry genealogically blemished men. Now, what we're specifically talking about, we're not talking about like a mamzer, because remember, again, no one is permitted to, not no one, but again, remember, general women can't marry a mamzer. Let's say a chalal. So let's say a chalal. Let's say you have a man who is the product of a forbidden Kohanic union, a Kohenes, a Bas Kohen, is permitted to go out and marry such a man. To which the Gemara shlema, let's bring a support to this from our Mishnah. Chalal shenasa kshera, the Mishnah brought down a case of a chalal who married a kshera. So my love, Kohenes, the kshera, we'll say, isn't the kshera in question talking about the Kohenes, a Bas Kohen? Umay kshera, what does kshera mean? Kshera lekahuna. It ultimately means a woman who's kshera lekahuna, to which the Gemara says, Lo Yisraelis. No, not necessarily, it could just be talking about a Yisraelis. Umay kshera. So what does it mean when it says kshera? Kshera lekal. It means a person or a woman who is permitted to marry into the general assembly of Klal Yisrael. Ihachi, if that's the case, then about when you find the parallel term on the male side, Ihachi, yeshlo ach kosher. When we speak about the case where the husband has an ach kosher, that's the case of a chalal who got married and he has an ach kosher. So does kosher also mean nami kosher lakal? Does that also mean that it's kosher lakal? Michlal duhu pasal. That makes it sound like the husband in question is someone who is pasal lakal elalav kohen. Rather, it has to mean ultimately kosher lakuna, or Kohen himself, umidahu Kohen, he Kohanes. And from the fact that in that case, he's a Kohen, then the parallel case we're talking about the woman, she must be a Kohanes. To which the Gemara says, not necessarily, mide iria, hakidi isa, vahakidi isa. So we'll say, so again, remember, just to be clear, we're trying to prove a point here. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, that halacha l'maisa, Kohanic women, right, what we call Kohanos, are permitted to marry men who don't have unblemished genealogy. Now again, there's really only one case under consideration, which is the case of Chalal. Because remember again, any other man, a Nesin, a Mamzer, all of these other people have other restrictions. But we're trying to prove over here, so we'll say, essentially, what this means is that a Kohen and a Kohenes do not have the same halachas, right? So if a man is a Kohen, then obviously he is limited in who he can marry. If a woman is a Kohenes, Bas Kohen, she doesn't have the same limitations. We just tried to prove that, it didn't work out. Fine. Masir Ravin Bar Nachman, so Ravin Bar Nachman brings down the pasuk. So we'll say lo yikachu. So the pasuk over there we're talking about is as follows: Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu, talking about a Kohen. Kohen can't marry an Isha zona or a chalala, the isha grusha me isha lo yikachu. And a woman who's divorced, he also lo yikachu, cannot marry. To which the Gemara says, lo yikachu, lo yikachu. Why does it have to say it twice? Melamed sha isha musheres al yedei ish. But say, take a look at Rashi, lo yikachu, lama li lemichtav lo yikachu trezimni. Why does it have to say lo yikachu twice? Lahazhira isha al yedei ha'ish. So we'll say, listen to this. Literally it means to warn the woman about the man. Both say this is fascinating. The Gemara is making the following suggestion. It says, Lo yikachu, they may not marry twice. One is to tell a Kohen that he's not permitted to marry these women, and one is to tell a Kohenes that she is not permitted to marry forbidden men as well. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Kol heicha dehu musar hi musheres, v'chol heicha dehu lo musar hi lo mizdara. Rava says it teaches us, wherever the Kohen has a restriction, she's restricted. Wherever the Kohen doesn't have a restriction, she's not restricted. So we'll say, again, according to this, what are we saying? This is contradicting Rav Yehuda the name of Rav. Rav Yehuda the name of Rav wanted to say the restrictions that a Kohen has in marriage, a Kohenes doesn't have. Now the Gemara is suggesting from the two lo yikachus, that's not the case. And in fact, from the two lo yikachus, ultimately, again, one lo yikachu is for the Kohanim themselves, and one lo yikachu is for the Kohanos, is for the women. To which the Gemara says, 1 second, do we learn out the fact that a Kohenes has the same restrictions as a Kohen? From this phrase of lo yikachu, we learned that out. Midrash Yehuda Marav. Nafka Rav Yehuda Marav. Rav Yehuda says the name of Rav. V'chein Tanad Rav Yishmael Ish o Isha ki yasu mikol chatos ha'adam. So let's listen to this. The pasuk says, Ish o Isha, if a man or a woman will commit any of the chatos, right? Any of the averos. So what do you see from here? Hishva hakasov Isha le'ish l'chol onshin shebatorah. This is fascinating. This is I just want to point out, just follow the names here. This is Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav said, when the pasuk speaks about Averos, what does it say? Isha Isha. What does that teach you? When it comes to prohibitions in the Torah, men and women are the same. Whatever prohibitions a man has, a woman has. Whatever prohibitions a woman has, a man has. Same prohibitions. So I will say, so I just want to point out, this would seemingly contradict what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav beforehand. Because what did how do we begin today's daf? Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, there are the marital restrictions that a Kohen has, a Kohenes doesn't have. So I will say, so remember again, just so you follow the progression. So we start out with that statement, right? Then the Gemara challenges that. How does the Gemara challenge it? From lo yikachu. It says lo yikachu twice. And what do we want to do with lo yikachu twice? One, to teach me who Kohanim can't marry, and also to apply the fact that women also, whoever a Kohen can't marry, a Kohenes can't marry. To which the Gemara says, I don't need that limud. I have another limud. Rav Yehuda name of Rav says, Isha Isha kiyasmi kol chatos ha'adam. Men and women are equal with Averos. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not a good raya. I'll tell you why. Imeahi hava amina lav hashava bakol. See, I both say, from that phrase of Isha Isha kiyasmi kol chatos ha'adam, I would assume that we're talking about an Avera that applies equally to everyone. Right? So if you have an Avera that applies equally to everyone, so ultimately, again, that's when men and women are equal. However, avalav she'eno shava bakol. I will say, give you an example, like kashrus. Right? Kashrus. You're not allowed to eat chazer. I will say, right, does that lav apply equally? Yes. I will say, what's an example of a lav that doesn't apply equally? Right? Kohanim. Who Kohanim can marry? Because Kohanim have certain restrictions that the rest of the nation does not. So the Havamina was, if you're just learning out from the pasuk, Isha kiyasu mikol chatos ha'adam, that men and women have the same restrictions, I would have said true. In a situation where we're talking about a restriction that applies to all of Klal Yisrael, but a restriction that applies to some but doesn't apply to others, maybe men and women are not the same. What about Tumah? The she'ein shava bakol. Tumah is not the same halacha by everyone. I will say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. V'hari lav de Tumah. Rashi says, de'ein shava bakol, de'ein Yisrael musharin liga d'chsiv emor la kohanim musharin v'lo Yisrael. I will say, for example, if I'm Yisrael, and I decide, you know what? I've got a couple of hours free today. I'm going to go become tamei. Right? I'm just going to roll around in a beis hakvaras, right? Let's say, so the truth is, that's my business. Strange, but that's my business, right? There's no problem for me as Yisroel to become tamei. A Kohen has a biblical prohibition against actively becoming tamei. So we'll say Tumah is a good example. Tumah is a lav that's not shava bakol. It doesn't apply to everyone equally. And I will say, interestingly enough, at time of the Kasav Rahmana, and I will say, now remember, so based on let's just follow the progression. based on what we just said, I would have thought that the pasuk of Ish o Isha Kiyasimi Kol Chato Sa'adam tells me that a lav, that a Shava called a lav that applies equally to men, a lav that applies to everyone would also be applied equally to men and to women. But a lav that doesn't apply to everyone is not automatically applied to women. So I will say Tumah is a good example. Tumah is a lav that doesn't equally apply to everyone, right? Yisroelim have one set of halachas, Kohanim have a different set of halachas. And yet, what does the Torah say? For time of the Kasav Rachmana B'nei Aaron. Yet I will say, when it comes to the halachos of Tumah, the Torah says B'nei Aaron. And what do we learn from that? V'lo B'nos Aaron. So you need a pasuk to exclude women, right? You need a pasuk to teach you that halacha l'maisa, women are not subject to the same halachos of Tumah. Now, Abosai, he said, what do you see from this? Halav hachi, were it not for the fact that the pasuk excluded women, hava amina nashim chayavos. I would have thought ultimately that women are subject to the halachos of Tumah. Then Abosai, at the end of the day, see that without an explicit exception, I would have included women, even though it's not a lav hashave bakol. My time, why is that so? Lav mishum Rav Yehuda Marav. Abosai, that must be because of Rav Yehuda, the name of Rav, namely that halacha l'maisa. I would have included lo the gamrinan milo yikachu. So we're saying no. I would have learned it out from the pasuk of lo yikachu, the two lo yikachus that teaches me that when it comes to the halachos of kahuna, women are equally subject. To which the Gemara says, Ike da amri kicha itzrichale. Others say that the kicha leikachu is necessary. Why? Sachadai tchamina ligmar mituma. I would have thought otherwise to learn it out from Tumah. Kamashmal or no, that we don't equate the women to the men when it comes to the kahuna. So I will say, so again, that stops this discussion over here. So I will say, bottom line, we're not finished yet, but let's just talk about what we have up until this point in time. We have a statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, which tells me that what? That lo husaru ksheros li nasi lepsulin. Kohanos, right? Bas Kohanim, women from Kohanic families, do not have a restriction as to who they can marry, which again really only applies to one person in particular, a halal. Whereas a Kohen cannot marry a halala, a Kohenes can marry a halal. That's Rav Yehuda's in the name of Rav. The Gemara challenged that. I will say, in the course of that challenge, a couple of other very interesting halachos come up. Namely, that halacha l'maisa, Rav Yehuda also says the name of Rav, Isha kiyasu mikol chato sa'adam, teaches me that in the realm of Isser, men and women are the same. So whatever is usher to a man is usher to a woman. But we qualify that to say that only applies with a lav hashave bakol, a lav that applies to everyone equally. But you can't necessarily apply that logic to our conversation. We're talking about a lav that is not applied equally across the population. Good, let's go weiter. Rav Papa of Rav Huna Breid Rav Yoshua, Iklo lehinsibu. Listen to this. So Rav Papa and Rav Huna Breid Rav Yoshua went to Hinsibu, it's the name of a place, which happened to be La Asra de Rav Idi Bar Avin. Ultimately, again, which was the city of Rav Idi Bar Avin. So now they asked Rav Idi Bar Avin an amazing kasha. Hosaru ksheros lihinasi lipsulin olo. So they asked him the shaila, is a kohenes, right? Who is a kohenes, who is a kshera, is she permitted to go ahead and marry apostle or not? So they asked the shaila. Amar lu Rav Papa. So Rav Papa said, Tinisua. Ultimately, again, we learn this. So the Gemara Tinisua Asari Yuchsun Alumi Bavel. That's a very interesting brayso. Asari Yuchsun Alumi Bavel. Both said there are 10 genealogical classes which came up from Bavel. Then I will say this is a reference to Ezra, right? This is when the Jews were returning back with Ezra from Bavel. 10 genealogical classes. Who are they? Listen to this. This is just so fascinating. Kohanim, Leviim, Yisroelim. Okay, those we know. Chalalim. So also remember again, a chalal is the product of a forbidden Kohanic union. Gerim, converts. Charurim. And I will say charurim are avodim kinanim who are emancipated. Right? Now remember again, they're also gerim, but they're like another subset of gerim. Mamzerim, okay? Nisinim, who we've spoken about. Shtuki. You also remember again, who's the shtuki? That's the kid who, when he asks his mother about his father, she says, shh, right? She silences him, right? Or he points out saying, hey, this is not my father, and she says, quiet. Asufi, Rabbi means a child who was collected from the marketplace, an adopted child who does not know his paternity. Right? Good. So we'll say those are the 10 genealogical classes. Now watch this. Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Mutarim, Lavo, Zebazeh. So we'll say when it comes to Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, they're permitted to intermarry. Right? No problem there. Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalolim, Gerim, Charurim, Mutarim, Lavo, Zebazeh. Rabbi say similarly again, Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalolim, Gerim, Charurim. Again, Rabbi say Charurim are just emancipated slaves. They're Gerim. Those classes, those groups, I shouldn't say classes, those groups are permitted to marry into each other as well. Geire, Charure, Umamziri, Nisini, Shtuki, Vasufi, Mutarim, Lavo, Zebazeh. And about say, Mamzer, Nisin, Shtuki, Asufi, they're permitted to marry, these groups are permitted to marry. Shabbos say, now what do you see from here? V'ilu, Kohanos, L'chala, Lo Katani. Shabbos say, what doesn't it say in this group? It doesn't say that a Kohenes is permitted to marry a Chalal. So it's pretty explicit that a Kohenes, a Bas Kohen, right, a Kshera, is not permitted to marry a Chalal. To which the Gemara says, no, it's not a good raya. I'll tell you why. Dahani nas bimihani, vihani nas bimihani katoni. I will say, the way this price is structured is when it gives permission for groups to marry into each other, it only lists their permission if it works both ways. If the men from one group can marry the women from the other group, and the women from one group can marry the men of the other group. But if it only works in one direction, the Braisa, doesn't say it. And therefore, again, Kohen, Kevan de'ilu baile minsiv chalala, asirale lo katani. Sirabo say, it could very well be that a Kohenes could marry a Chalal. But remember, everyone agrees that what? A Kohen can't marry a Chalala. So because a Kohen can't marry a Chalala, the Braisa doesn't list the fact that Kohanim can marry into Chalalim, because the relationship doesn't work both ways. But it's still possible, that a Kohenes could marry a Chalala. So Asula Kamid Ravidi Barabin, they came before Ravidi Barabin, so we'll say this is grace. Remember again, this whole conversation is taking place between Rav Papa and Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yoshua. They're having this conversation in Hinsibu, which is the city of Rav Idi Bar Abin. So Rav Papa is going through this whole drasha. So Asla Kamid Rav Idi Bar Abin, they bring this before Rav Idi Bar Abin. Amruluhu Dardiki, boss, listen to this. Rav Idi Bar Abin says, children, Hachi Am Rav Yehuda Marav. Rav Yehuda Marav said as follows, Lo Husaru Ksheros Lihinase Lipsulim. Right? Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav, there is no problem for Ksheros, for a Bas Kohen to marry Psulin. Rabbi say this is such a fascinating exchange. Because Rabbi say, what is Rav Idi Bar Avin saying? Guys, stop it. Stop it, children. Stop it. This is the halacha, and now let's move on. So Rabbi say, it's actually quite fascinating on a number of different levels. Rabbi say, this is also sometimes in life, you're engaged in a discussion with a person, and the truth is, you make the point, right? You're having a particular discussion, and you make your point. So at a certain point in time, either you accept the point or you don't accept the point, but you can't keep arguing it. This is an important yesod, because sometimes in life we try to keep arguing to convince a person of our position. At a certain point in time, either you accept or you don't accept, but you can't keep belaboring the same point over and over and over. Accept it, don't accept it, let's move on. It's an important yesod. Will say also, like, sometimes in life there are things we don't understand and we grapple with. Sometimes in life also a person has to accept, I don't understand it, but I accept that this is the way that it is. Let's move on. You see, sometimes people get caught up in dynamics, whether it's interpersonal, theological, and they just keep mulling over the same things over and over and over and over. Interpersonally, sometimes again I have a disagreement with someone and I'm hurt and I'm upset. Sometimes you just have to accept it and move forward. Sometimes theologically there are things I don't understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs his world or why he does his things. Accept it and simply move forward. That's what Rav Yisrael here over here. You see Rav Yidi Bar Avin saying, guys, you've just spent the last Amud going through all of this. The halacha is like Rav Yehuda, the name of Rav, namely that ksheros can marry psulos. And I both say this is indeed how the Rambam paskins as well in Hilchos Isurei Bia, Parak Yutes Halacha Yud Aleph. Here Rambam says explicitly, Avala Kohenes Muteres Lihinasi Lechalal Uleger Ulemeshuchrar. A Kohenes is permitted to marry a Chalal, a Ger, or an emancipated Evet Kanani. Why? Shelo Husaru Ksheros Lihinasi Lepsulin. Because again, Ksheros, right, Kohanos are not prohibited to marry Psulin Shnei Amar, Bnei Aaron, Velo Benos Aaron. Because when it comes to marital restrictions, it's dafka stated as Bnei Aaron and not Benos Aaron. So I will say, quite amazing. Quite amazing. So that's how you pass halacha l'maisa. So whereas a Kohen has all of these marital restrictions, a Kohenes has none of them. Good. Halacha l'maisa. Let's go. Shnios min divrei sofrim. So also remember again, this is a fascinating, riveting sugya. And also we were bothered from this already in yesterday's daf. Remember again, what did we see in yesterday's daf? That if you are married, right, to a woman who is an Isser Da'araisa, she has what? She has a ksuva. She has a ksuva. Yet if you're married to a Sheni, rabbinic erva, what? No ksuva. But no ksuva, by the way, and none of the associated rights of ksuva as well. So let's go. So ba'u mine b'nei biri mirav sheshes. So b'nei biri asks from Rav Sheshes as follows: Shnia lebal v'lo shnia liyavam. So we'll say if you have a situation of a woman who is a shnia rabbinic erva to the baal, but not a rabbinic erva to the yavam. So we'll say the Mishnah paskin, so she doesn't have a ksuva. She doesn't have a ksuva from her husband. But yesh la ksuva miyavam. So we'll say, what about in this case if the husband dies, and now she does yibum? Does she get a ksuva from the yavam? But remember we had this sugya before. So let's analyze. Kevan davar ksuva sa'al nichsei bayla harishon lesle. So we'll say, do we say that look in general, ksuva goes against the property of the first husband, right, of the now deceased husband. We'll say in general, the yavam does not have an obligation of ksuva. So do we say that since halacha l'maisa, generally the ksuva ultimately again is against the first husband's property, and therefore halacha l'maisa, since she has no ksuva from her first husband, therefore what? She has no ksuva from the yavam. Oh, dilma keva de ilu les la mirishon takin li rabbanim misheni isla. But say, remember again, we learned this halacha. Although normally the ksuva is from the first husband's estate, what happens if the first husband was totally poor, impoverished, and had no money to give her a ksuva? In that case, we instruct the yavam to give her a ksuva. So what about in this case, Rabbi say, where as a result of the forbidden union with her first husband, there is no ksuva? Would we instruct the yavam to give her a ksuva? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Sheshes said, Tanisa, we learn this. In general, a woman's ksuva goes against her first husband's property. So, but if she is a shnia, right, the rabbinic erva to her husband, ultimately she doesn't even have a ksuva from her yavam. Michlal di'ika, the Islami yavam, which makes it sound like there would be a case where potentially she would have a ksuva from the yavam, to which the Gemara says, you're right. But Chisur Mechsura is always the best. It's like bonus material, right? Chisur Mechsura, there's a piece that's missing. Here we go. Here is the halacha. In general, a woman's ksuva is against her first husband. And what v'ilesla mirishon takinu la misheni. However, I will say in a situation where, let's say, the first husband died and he's penniless, we instruct the yavam to go ahead and provide her with a ksuva. However, I was saying, if her first marriage was prohibited, rabbinically prohibited, then in that case we do not, as much as there's still a mitzvah of yibum, we would not obligate the yavam to go ahead and give her a ksuva. And I will say that is indeed halacha b'aisa. So really, three halachas over here. Halacha number one is that a woman's ksuva is levied against her first husband's estate, in the case of Yibum. Halacha number 2, if her first husband died penniless, we instruct the Yavam to provide her with a ksuva. Halacha number 3, if the first husband was a sheni, was a rabbinic erva, right? Rabbinically prohibited marriage, then ultimately, again, she has no ksuva from number 1, and we don't instruct the Yavam to give her a ksuva as well. That's the halacha. Weiter. By Mini Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar lekoin gadol, grusha vechalutz lekoin hedyot, yesh lamazonos, ha'in lamazonos. It was a fascinating case. Here's the shaila. It was saying Amana marries a kohen gadol, right? Or grusha vechalutz lekoin hedyot. So a kohen marries an illegal, right? He marries an illegal woman. Right? So let's say the kohen gadol marries an almana, marries a widow. So Rabbi say, is he obligated to provide her with mazonos or not? Is he obligated to support her? To which the Gemara says, hey, Dami, I don't understand, what's the case? So I don't understand. If they're living together, right, they're married, so we want this Kohen to divorce his wife. So we're trying halachically to get him to divorce her, and you're going to give her support? Doesn't make any sense. I will say that seems to undermine any effort to force the dissolution of this marriage. No, we'll say, what's the case? Listen to this. The case over here is where husband, went overseas. He went overseas, and I will say, what happened? He didn't leave her with any money, and he didn't leave her with any mazonos. So what does she do? She takes out a loan in order to provide for her needs. Is he obligated to go ahead and pay back the loan? That's the shaila. So the Gemara says, "My mizoni tonight ksuvanin hu umidi is like ksuva is like mizoni." So do we say that mizonos is part of the function of ksuva? And since Rabbi say this woman does have a ksuva, ultimately, again, therefore, he'd be obligated to pay back the loan. So the Gemara says, Isla mizone o dilma ksuva dil mishka lemefik isla mizone dilma tiakev gabe lesla. On the other hand, Rabbi say, no. The reason we have a ksuva is because ksuva is a good way to encourage the dissolution of the marriage. Why? Because there's a payout. Mizonos will encourage what? The continuity of the marriage. So maybe we don't want to give her mizonos. So Amrlei Lesla. He said she has no mizonos. So it's a very interesting case. Allah Chalamaisa, even when a Kohen is married to an almana, illegal marriage, halal Chalamaisa, she does have a ksuba, but no mizonos. And no mizonos in two forms. Number one, he's not obligated to actively sustain her. And if she takes out a loan to provide for her needs, he is not on the hook for that loan. Incredible. Tanya Yeshla. But also we have a brisa that says she does have mizonos. Kitanya hila achar misa. Oh, said she does have mizonos. When does she have mizonos? After he dies. See, I will say, one of the Tanai Ksuva, one of the conditions of the Ksuva, is that if a woman is widowed, she receives support from the estate as long as what? She doesn't remarry. So I will say, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, if the Kohen dies, so the almana continues to get mizonos. So I will say, because in that case, we have no problem with her getting mizonos. Why no problem with her getting mizonos? Why no problem? Husband's dead. There's no longer an illegal marriage. So I will say, really fascinating. So Allah Chalames, what we're saying is like this. Kohen Gadol marries an almana, illegal marriage. She has a ksuva. She has, for reasons we'll discuss, she has a ksuva, but no mizonos. Bryce says she does have mizonos, if he dies. If she's widowed and has not remarried, she continues to receive support from the estate in the form of mizonos. So the Gemara says, Is the Amri, of alternate version of this, Amrele, Tanya, Yeshla. We have a brisa that says that she gets mizonos. How could that be? But he's obligated to divorce her. Why would you give her support if ultimately, again, he's obligated to divorce her? Ve'ela hatanya yeshla kitanya hila achar misa. What we will say, just in the same idea, but just alternate version of this. So when do we say that she has mizonos? After he dies. So I will say, Tan Rabbanan, Amar lekoin gadol, grusha vechalutz lekoin hedyot, yeshla ksuva, peiros, mizonos, belos, v'hi psula, vlada pasol, v'hotzi, v'kofin osa lahotzi. So also listen to this. If a Kohen Gadol marries an almana, or Kohen Hedyot marries a grusha v'chalutza, what's the halacha? Number one, she has ksuva. Number two, there is peros also like we discussed. Number three, there is mizonos, obligated to support. Number four, belos, which also means in the event of divorce, he has to give her whatever is left over from the property that she brought into the marriage. V'hi psula. Rabbi says she's puzzle. right? How is she pasul? Why? What's her status now? What is she? She is a chalala. She's a chalala. Not only that, vlada pasul. Her offspring are also chalala. It's a legal marriage. The governor salahotzi, and ultimately we force the husband to divorce her. We'll say that's case number one. Case number two, shnios midivrei sofrim. What happens if a man is married to a rabbinic erva? Ein la ksuva, she has no ksuva, lo peiros, lo mazonos, velo belos. So we'll say no ksuva, no peiros, no support, no belos, vihik sheira. We'll say now again, this is only a rabbinic erva, therefore she is kasher, vlada kasher, her offspring is kasher, the kofin oso lahotzi, and we obligate him to go ahead and divorce her. So we'll say, there is an obvious and glaring question over here. How could it be that in the case of biblically prohibited marriage, all of the rights are intact? There's ksuva, there's peiros, there's mizonos, there's belos, and yet in rabbinic marriage, no ksuva, no mazonos, or no ksuva, no peiros, no mazonos, no belos. What's going on over here? Here we go. I will say, what we're really focused on is ksuva, because really everything else stems from ksuva. So let's narrow this down a little bit. If you are in a biblically prohibited marriage, you are a kohen gadol, you marry an almana, you are obligated to give your wife a ksuva, and all of the ksuva rights are still there. Conversely, if you're married to a rabbinic erva, no ksuva. What's the pshat? We're going to see a number of opinions. Rav says, why is it that an almana married to a kohen gadol gets a ksuva? But listen to this. Because in that case, where a kohen gadol is married to an almana, what's the impact of the marriage? It's felt on both of them. Because remember again, she's psula. Why is she a psula? What is she? She's a chalala. What about him? What about the kohen gadol? He's also pasul. As long as he's married to this woman, he is pasul. He can't do anything. The chomakom shehu pasul v'hi psula. And about in any situation where they're both pasul, Amadeus kansu oso ksuva. Ultimately, again, they penalize him by keeping the ksuva intact. Now, we'll say, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Tap Rashi Peham and Beis. Kansu oso ksuva. Kolomar lo kansuha misha'ar nashim v'hayde kansuhu rabbanon l'shnios. Well, actually, before I get this, we'll say. See, here's what's interesting. See, in a situation where they're both pasul, we'll say, we know that it's only a matter of time until what? Until he divorces her. Because the Kohen is not going to want to live under a state of psul. Excuse me. So we'll say, thank you. So we'll say, so because they're both possible, because they're both impacted, it's an unsustainable situation. So we know that he's going to divorce her. So I will say, because we know he's going to divorce her, Chazal did not feel there was any reason to levy an additional penalty upon her that she should not get a ksuva. So I will say, so in other words, remember, what's our goal? We'll say in all of these cases, what's our goal? We have one goal. What's the goal? Dissolution of the marriage. That's our goal. And whatever tools we need to use to force or to push the hand for a divorce, that's what we're going to do. In a case where they're both pasul, we know that this is an unsustainable union because the Kohen is not going to want to live in a state of psul. So therefore, we don't need to deprive her of her ksuva in order to go ahead and force the dissolution of the marriage. On the other hand, so I will say, what about by shnios? Yeah, by shnios again, there's no ksuva. Now I will say, now why is that? Because I will say, what's the impact when you marry a sheni? What's the impact when you marry a sheni? What's the impact? None. Right? There's no personal impact. There's no offspring impact. And therefore what? The Gemara says, kansu osa ksuva. I will say, in a situation where there is no impact upon either of them, that's when Chazal removed the ksuva. Now go back to that top Rashi. It's the Rashi kansu osa ksuva. Rashi says, now listen to this. He says, v'hayde kansua l'rabbanan l'shniya ksuva kadesh lo tisakiv etzlohi hu dechevan de lo tehavi la ksuva minei shavkale v'nafka. So I will say, listen to this. Watch this. In the case of a shnia, see Rabbosai, listen to this. So a man is married to a sheni, a man is married to a rabbinic erva. Rabbosai, is there any good reason for them to go ahead and dissolve this marriage? Is there any good reason for them to get divorced? Think about it just a moment. Is there any good reason? No. Leaving aside Rabbosai that it's wrong, right? Leaving aside that it's wrong, but I said no good reason, because after all, there's no impact upon him, there's no impact upon her, and there's no impact upon who? Offspring. Everything is fine. So wherein lies the impetus to dissolve this rabbinically prohibited marriage? I'll tell you where. Chazal said no ksuva. That will say once there's no ksuva, that also means what? No ksuva associated rights. So no ksuva, no peros, no mizonos, no belows. If that's the case, the woman is not going to want to stay in a marriage like this. So Rabosai, it's not like we're trying to single-handedly penalize the woman. It's that this is the only way to force the divorce if essentially she has no financial rights. And really he has no financial rights in her stuff either. At the end of the day, that is what is going to compel them to make a divorce. So Rabosai, so this is the position of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Wherein lies the distinction ultimately again between a biblically prohibited marriage and a rabbinically prohibited marriage? In a biblically prohibited marriage, there's a status issue. The Kohen becomes pasul. The woman becomes a halala. Because they're both pasul and the offspring is pasul, that by itself is going to force the dissolution of the marriage. You don't have to penalize her by depriving her of the ksuva. In a case of sheni, rabbinically prohibited marriage, there's no status issue. Therefore, the only way to force the divorce is remove the ksuva. Rabbi Yomi Rabbi says, halalu divrei Torah. So what it says is a simpler distinction. I will say, when we're talking about a biblically prohibited marriage, that's daraisa. The divrei Torah in tzrich and chizuk. Rabbi say, people treat an isur daraisa with greater severity. Therefore, you don't have to penalize anymore. People will treat an isur daraisa severely. Halalu divrei sofrim, whereas sheni is only a derabanan. The divrei sofrim tzrich and chizuk. And Rabbi say, rabbinic law requires additional bolstering. So therefore, in a biblically prohibited marriage, you don't have to remove the ksuva. But in a rabbinically prohibited marriage, it needs additional chizuk, it needs additional teeth. And therefore, again, halacha l'maisa will remove the ksuva. Davar acher, I will say another possibility. Zehu is fascinating. Another possibility is Zehu margila, v'zu hi margila so. I will say the other possibility is the following. In the case of an almana who marries the Kohen Gadol, Zehu margila, he convinces her, and in the case of the shnia, she convinces him. But say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Zehu margila, Rashi says over here, Almana l'Kohen Gadol, Grusha v'chalitza l'Kohen Hedyot, Hu margila umasiso linaselo. In the case of the Kohen marrying the Almana, we assume that it's the Kohen who has to convince her. Why, Rabbi say? Why does the Kohen have to convince her? Rabbi say, because this is not a good proposition for the woman. Why not? As much as it's great to be married to the Kohen Gadol, why is it not good for Rabbi say? She becomes a halala. Right? Remember again, as much as she's going to get a ksuva and all of her rights, her status forever changes. As much as his status changes as well, his status only changes for how long? For how long? As long as he's married. Once he divorces, his status reverts back to what it was before. She and the kids are forever have a status change. So we assume in the case of the Kohen who marries the Almana Grusha, ultimately, again, he has to convince her. Because he has to convince her, that's why there's a ksuva. The zo shnia, Rashi says, the cheban delo ihi mifsala, v'lav zara mifsa, v'lo mafsada midibose, as opposed to the case of the sheni, in the case of the sheni, who is encouraging the marriage? She is convincing him. So because she's convincing him, ultimately, again, no ksuva. So Rabbi say, in this version, the rights to the ksuva are dependent on who we assume is the initiator of the marriage. In the case of the Isur D'Oraisa, we assume it's the man who's the initiator since he has very little to lose. Therefore, the ksuva is intact. In the case of the Sheni, we assume it's she who is the initiator of the marriage, and therefore we remove the ksuva. Davar Acher, another possibility. Man katanila. So the Gemara says, Davar Achar, Man Katanila, Ikeda Amar of Shimon Elazar Katanila. So we'll say, who is the author of this last Davar Achar? That it's dependent on who is the initiator of the marriage. The Gemara suggests perhaps this is a continuation of the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Umatam Kamar. So we're going back. Remember again, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said as follows, Matam Amru Hu Pasal Vihi Psula Kansu Osa Ksuva. Why is it that in the case of ultimately, again, he's puzzled, she's psula, they took away the ksuva? In the case of Sheni, mipnei shehu margila. Ultimately, again, because he initiates. So the Gemara says, in other words, in the case, where it's an Isser Da'araisa, why is it that we force him to give her a ksuva? Because we assume that he is the initiator. Umatam hu kasher v'hikshera kansu osa ksuva. And in the case of where they're both ksherim, i.e. a sheni, ultimately, again, why do we deprive her of the ksuva? Mipnei shehi margila so. So Rabbi say, because she is the initiator. So we're linking this back with Reb Shimon Elazar. So remember again, Reb Shimon Elazar was the opinion who said that halacha l'maisa, well, the first opinion. So we're linking the davar acher with Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Se'ikid da Amr Rabbi say an alternate version of this, Rabbi Katanila. Maybe the davar acher is actually Rabbi. V'chalutza kakashya. What about the case of chalutza? What about the case of chalutza? We'll say, look at Rashi just a moment. Ikid da Amr Rabbi Katanila. Shenasan tam ledvarav mipnei shein shal Torah. So Rabbi say Rabbi was the opinion who said that the distinction between the cases is an Isser Da'araisa versus an Isser D'Rabbanan. An Isser Da'araisa doesn't require chizik, and therefore halacha l'maisa keep the ksuva intact. An Isser D'Rabbanan does require ksuva, and therefore deprive her of it. So others say that davar acher is Rabbi, and what about the case of chalutza? Chalutza d'Rabbanan. What about the case of chalutza? Which is Shabbos say for a kohen to marry a chalutza that is quote unquote only an Isser D'Rabbanan, v'isla ksuva, and yet ultimately again she still has a ksuva. Hadar Amar Kevan de Pasule Midrabanan, since ultimately again is Psul Midrabanan, Zel Margila. So we'll say that's the case of Vizohi Margila so. So we'll make the distinction ultimately again in terms of who is the initiator of the marriage. Ma'ika Bein Rabbi Reb Shimon Elazar. Rabbi say, so now we'll say again, we have two opinions, Rabbi and Reb Shimon Elazar, as to how to explain the distinction. Why in the case of an Isser Da'araisa there is a ksuva, yet in the case of the Sheni there is not a ksuva. So wherein lies the distinction between Rabbi and Reb Shimon Elazar? Rav Chisda mamzeres unesina li Yisroel ika beinayu. Rabbi will say the nafkamin will be in the case of a mamzeres or an esina who marries Yisrael. Man da amr da'araisa hanami da'araisa. So Rabbi will say if you hold it's just a din in the da'araisa, so mamzer and esina li Yisrael is an Isser Da'araisa. Man darmnei shehum margir law. I will say the one who makes it as a distinction between who is the initiator of the marriage, he margalalei. These would both be cases where she would be initiating the marriage. So Rabbi say, because again, remember, since she's the mamzeres, she's the nesina, ultimately, again, she would be the one trying to convince the man to marry her. Ol Rabbi Elazar da'amar harizeh eved umamzer ha lo margalalei v'lomidi. But according to Rabbi Elazar, who says that the offspring ultimately again has the same status, she would not be the one who would initiate. Ela Amrav Yosef, Machzir Grusha Mishanises Ikabenayo. A good enough communication would be the case of Machzir Grusha. A case of a man who divorces his wife and then remarries her after she married someone else. I'll say it differently. Man divorces his wife, she remarries, then she divorces, now he remarries her again. Man Da'amr Da'oraisa, Hanami Da'oraisa. The opinion that says that in Isser Da'araisa, this is also Isser Da'araisa. But the opinion that says that it's a distinction between who initiates the marriage, he margalalei. In the case of Machzir Grusha, so once again, she would be the initiator. But according to Rabbi Akiva, who holds that even with an Isser Lav, such a union creates mamzeros, she would not be the initiator of this union because she would not want children who are mamzerim. To which the Gemara says, "Halo margalei v'lomidi." Elam Rapapa beula lekohen gadol ika beinayu. Rapapa says it must be the case of a beula to the kohen gadol. Man da'amar da'araisa hanami da'araisa. This will still be his da'araisa. Uman darmnishu margila he margala lei. But I will say the one who says about its initiation, she would be the one who initiates. Or the Elazar ben Yaakov yichchol mechai v'yaseh. Halo margalalei. But according to Elazar ben Yaakov, who says that you could even have a chalal from an asay, she would not initiate because she would not want her children ultimately again. I know my time is up, I know. Right, so I'll say ultimately again, just 30 seconds. But ultimately again, according to the one who says that there is a chalal from chai v'yaseh, she would not initiate. The one who says, we must listen to this. Max your suffix. All right, you know what? We'll say, I'm trying to get to. We'll have to stop. We'll stop over here. We'll say, so just to understand where we're stopping. Where we're stopping over here, we'll say is, we're focused on a single question, which is, halacha l'maisa, right? Why is it that in the case of a sheni, there is no ksuva, yet in the case of a daraisa, there is a ksuva. We have two opinions. We have Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Shimon ben Elazar essentially says that halacha l'maisa, what we want is dissolution of the marriage. So in the case, ultimately, again, of an Isser Daraisa, I don't need to deprive her of the ksuva to go ahead and force the dissolution of the marriage. Why? Because halakha l'maisa, there's a status issue. In the case of a derabanan, because there's no status issue, I need to deprive her of the ksuva in order to force the divorce. Rebbe says it's simpler. It's simpler. And again, I will say in Rav Shimon ben Elazar, there's also again this idea, we look at who initiates the marriage. Whoever initiates, that's where we penalize. Rebbe says it's simpler. In a doraisa, people treat doraisa with severity. You don't need an extra layer of chumrah. In a derabanan, people don't treat it with severity. You need an extra layer of chumrah, i.e. deprive her of the ksuva. Rabbi will say we'll finish the sugya and do the halacha l'maisa tomorrow. Shkoyach. Have a great day, Bennett.